Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Doc Podcast. Today, my guest is Mr. Erik Brenner. Erik is a private wealth advisor and the president and CEO of Hilltop Wealth and Tax Solutions, a fiduciary firm that integrates advanced financial planning with in-house tax strategy. With over 30 years of experience, Erik specializes in helping his clients save and build wealth, as well as preserving and distributing their hard-earned dollars in their later years. He and his team act as the central hub for clients' retirement income planning, tax mitigation, and wealth preservation. Erik has also published a book, a bestseller on Amazon, titled The Personal CFO Revolution, a comprehensive guide to navigating your retirement. And we're going to discuss many of the strategies included in that book during the show today. Before we begin, I want to say that I realize this topic can be both confusing and overwhelming for many people. It's not easy to talk about money, and let's face it, most of us don't get this stuff in school. Yet money is something we all need and we need to understand. And if we don't, we are at risk of making dire mistakes that can jeopardize our financial security now and later in life. So to help simplify that, what I decided to do for today's show is break our conversation up into 4 time periods of life. The first is going to be when you're in or almost done with school till about 5 years out of school. The second is going to be from about 5 to 20 years into practice. The third is going to be from 20 years up until retirement. Again, some may retire prior to 20 years, but giving just general categories. And then the last will be while in retirement. For each time point, Erik and I are going to discuss how to approach savings, expenses, debt and debt payments, taxes, insurance, and overall general concepts about investing both pre and post-tax dollars. I figured this would be a really good way to parse the topic so people can get answers relative to their specific time point in life and get an idea of what to expect in the future for those of you who are in those earlier time periods. For those of you who are later in their careers, it's not only going to help give you advice specific to your time period, but you'll be able to get an idea of how to advise and guide those who are near to the start of their careers, whether that be an associate, a business partner, a family member, or in some cases, filling many of those shoes. This is going to be an amazing conversation and one that could truly change the course of your financial future. Please be sure to share the show with anyone who you think could benefit from hearing this information. Before we begin, I would like to add that the content and advice offered during today's episode is for informational purposes only and is not intended to serve as financial or legal advice. For advice relative to your specific situation, please consult with your own tax and legal professionals. So without further ado, let's get on to today's episode with Erik Brenner. Enjoy the show, everybody. Welcome to the Doc Podcast, Erik.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Really excited to have you on. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on. I know you're super busy and have a lot going on, and to take the time to share this with my audience. I'm grateful for that and for the opportunity to share this financial information with them. And this, what we're going to talk about today, really has profound impacts on people's personal lives as well as their professional lives. So before we dive into the content a little more and start talking about people and what they can do to enhance their financial future at any age, and we're going to talk a little more about how we're going to break that up, but tell me a little bit about your life, your story, your journey. How did you get to the point that you pursued this as a career, and what have you been doing to help others while you've been practicing this way?
Yeah, so I've been doing this 32 years almost as an advisor and guiding people along their financial journey. But prior to that, I really grew up in a family business. So we were entrepreneurs at heart. Basically from birth, I was an entrepreneur. And that family business was something that I didn't feel like I would want to carry on for decades. And so we sold those businesses, really was looking around to what are we going to do next? And I always liked finance, numbers, and I always liked helping people. And so this business was a bit of both, and we're able to help people all the way through their stages of life. And it's brought me to this. And as we continue to evolve, even now after 30 years, what we know is that things don't get easier. Tax laws change, which just changed recently, and it's getting more and more complex. And people just need to have a good guide on their financial decisions.
Yeah. And I think that gives you a really neat perspective, having the entrepreneurial background in business ownership from your family, plus then the financial instincts and then the desire to be helping others. It sounds like you found a perfect fit for you with your skill set.
Yeah, it did. It's for sure. And it helped obviously with work ethic, right? You're raised a good way, but it also gives a perspective because I am a business owner. So a lot of the clients that we work with are business owners in certain stages of life. So, it definitely is a great perspective to have.
Yeah, outstanding. I did preface in the intro a little bit about how we're going to break this up, and I'll repeat that in a second for everybody. Before we do that, just speaking generally, when I had my financial advisor on a while back, we spent some time talking about what a fiduciary is. So for people who haven't heard that episode or maybe aren't familiar with that, could you talk a little bit about what a fiduciary is and why that's something people should be looking for in an advisor?
Yeah. So a fiduciary advisor is one that must act in the best interest of the client by law. And so, and that seems like it should happen across the board with all advisors, but there are a lot of advisors that are not a true fiduciary. And so with the SEC and how we're licensed and regulated, there's a couple things there. One, again, we have to act in the best interest. Secondly, as a fiduciary, we don't take commissions. So we're not product salespeople. And so we want people to know, look, no matter what strategies, what you do, this is not about sales and getting sold. And this group of folks that are doctors, medical professionals, and so forth, unfortunately, a lot of times there's a target to sell stuff to this group. And so it's really important us to carry that out and know that we are really working in the best interest of the client each and every day to help improve their financial situation and guide them along the way.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And it is something just from my own personal experience that's been so valuable with Justin, and my financial advisor, because there are times that we'd have really good periods in the practice and there'd be surpluses. And he could have easily said, buy this product or, give it to me to put into this investment vehicle, this sort of paper asset, which he would get a percentage of in terms of his bottom line, so to speak. But he said, I think this is a really good time for you to diversify and invest in real estate. Or there was a storage facility opportunity I could invest in. And he said, yep, let's allocate resources to that. And that was a huge value to have someone who's a fiduciary who you could trust that was going to tell you what was best for your overall financial picture, as opposed to just trying to sell you a product or have you flip in and out, load fees, et cetera, to be able to back end, front end fees, to be able to get commissions off of you, but not really helping you build your financial wealth over time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really I think that's very, very important as someone takes on this relationship, because we work with people for a long time through retirement, unfortunately, all the way through until they move on. So it's really important to have that kind of independent person run alongside of you.
Thank you. So with the topic, we're going to break this up into some different stages. Before we go to the exact stages, and these are going to be kind of life stages that I'll outline again in a second, are there any sort of universal truths or philosophies that no matter at what point you are at in your working life or even late school life that you should be following? They just apply across the board and the things that everybody should be doing before we get a little more granular on the specifics by the age range?
Yeah, I think a plan. So we talk a lot about having a plan. And I think a plan, no matter where you're at in life, yes, your plan changes according to the stage of life you're in and what your goals are. But having actually a plan and taking time to talk about that. Are you on track? Not on track? What can you do to adjust it? That's a kind of a universal from those that are just getting out of school, like you said, all the way through to well into retirement. The plan changes underneath, but just making sure that you plan. One of the things that has happened over the last 25 years or so, we've had a major shift from when people retired 25 years ago, they had Social Security, many had pensions. And so they had a lot of money or income when they retired that they didn't have to make a lot of decisions on. You look at a pension, you chose your investment and away you go. Or you chose your income. Now you've got to make a lot more decisions because you're managing it. You're more yourself, or it's more on you as the employee or the worker. And so that's just across all board as it relates to planning.
Okay. No, thank you. And is it ever too early to make the plan? And then how often do you recommend your clients revisit that plan?
Yeah. So when you get into a career, that's really where you should start thinking about making a plan. And often we see somebody gets into a career and you get a year or two in and you start getting some cash flow. You're earning more than what you did in college or a lot more. And so putting the plan in place initially and then updating and changing, it depends on a couple things. One is goals. So it depends on your goals. You end up getting married and now you have kids and are you saving for college education and things of that nature. And then as you continue down your life and working, then there are other things that could affect you more, like the tax bill. So the new tax laws that just came out, that could affect you more later on in your working career than those that are younger in their working career. So there are things that you really don't control. And then there are things that you control based on goals and where you're at. So at least every 3 years, it should be a good look to see, is there any major adjustments? But as your situation gets more complex, then it's going to be more like every year. And depending on how complex your overall situation is. Okay.
And not to belabor the point, but because we get, as you probably know, little to any of this. That's one of the reasons I like doing these episodes, because we just don't get this in our training. And unless you have an MBA or some sort of background in finance and then end up in the professions, you just don't tend to get any of this information. So when you talk about a plan, is it something where you're sitting down with just your financial advisor? Does it need to be should both spouses, if you are married, involved? Is your CPA part of this? What does that planning meeting look like, ideally?
Yeah. And I think that would matter depending a little bit on what stage you're in. So if you're early on and you're kind of getting going in the accumulation stage, then involving your CPA may be needed for small portions, but maybe not a lot. Certainly with your spouse, plans just don't work out typically if you're married and you're not both engaged in the planning process. And then it's even more critical as you kind of continue on in your career and involving these other professionals. One of the things that we talk about is we want to be and are our clients' chief financial officer. So our chief financial officer in the coordination of really all things financial in their life. And things have gotten just so much more complex. In the 30 plus years I've been doing this, I remember when I started, there were 4,000 mutual funds available, 4,000. And there's probably close to 100,000 today. And so it's gotten so much more complex that you're not going to know it all. We have trouble keeping up. Right? There's thousands and thousands of pages of the new tax bill that just got signed. And so you don't need to know it all. You just need to know or have a relationship with someone that knows it or can find out the answers and have the resources. And so that planning side of it, it is important to keep it updated, especially if you're on a growth trajectory within your career.
Yeah. And another thing to add that I would say is an important thing for people to think about and take the time to do is in that planning process. I think a lot of times if we have advisors, we just look to them for the answers and we're just like, so tell me what to do. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what I found in my career in having advisors and working with them is they're only as good as the questions you ask them sometimes. In other words, you've got to have some sort of background or knowledge and be able to ask them the questions and have your information and know your numbers to give to them. Because if you're not giving them accurate projections or accurate estimates or laying out your vision or what you want and what your goals are, they're limited in what they can do to help you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. And it can be the numbers, but it also, you really don't think it out. Thinking 20 years down the road, what do you want to see happen? And if you don't think that through, then you're going to end up there and maybe you're not going to be able to achieve whatever goal you have for yourself.
Yeah, that's it. And it doesn't mean just because you're assembling a team to all, especially younger docs out there and even older docs, that you can just say, tell me what to do and
Right.
I'll do it. You've got to ask the questions when it comes to tax laws. Your CPA can't know everything you're doing in your practice. You have to understand enough of the fundamentals of tax law so that, as you said, you don't have to understand every word of the code, but you have to understand enough of the basics to be able to go to people and say, hey, look, this is what I'm up against here. And these are the questions I have. So.
Yeah, exactly. And we often say as business owners, right, there's working in the business and working on the business. So in one's financial life, there's kind of working in your career, and then there's working on your financial life, like overall, your life in general. And so you got to step back and know that. The other thing is you do have to realize it. So I think about when we're talking about this, like taxes. So a lot of times as incomes go up, you're just paying the tax, and you're not stepping back and realizing, man, this is a lot of tax. You're just used to paying it. You've got the income to cover it, but that does not mean that there are not strategies that can help minimize that.
Right.
And so you just kind of get in that mode of year after year after year. So it's really important from that. And that's all in the planning part of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point because you're busy and you've got a lot going on. It's like you look at that tax bill and you don't even know what you don't know. And that's where it's important to do some homework, spend some time reading and learning, and then ask your advisors and have a team of people to go to and say, hey, look, my tax bill is jumping like crazy lately. Is there anything I can do to help minimize my tax burden and help, as we're going to talk about more in a moment here, save and build my wealth for the future?
Correct. Absolutely.
So with that, let's start. I'm just going to break down and repeat what I had said in the intro about kind of how we're going to approach this. And I really appreciate your willingness to take this approach because I think this will be extremely helpful for people to compartmentalize this a bit. So we're going to break it down, and it doesn't have to be exact by the year, but just to give people kind of a general time frame. Those in school up to like, say, 5-ish years out, so early part of their career, those who have been in practice or working for, say, 5 to 20-ish years, those who are 20 years up towards retirement, whatever age that might be for them. And then kind of those retirement years, you're not generating income from your labor or your physical work, whatever that profession may be. So again, kind of school to 5 years, 5 to 20 years, 20 years to retirement, and retirement. We'll kind of break it down into that. And then for each of those, if you could, and I'll really just let you kind of go how you feel it's best to suggest. And I did give a disclaimer in the intro as well that what Erik and I are talking about is not personal financial advice for any specific individual. This is just general information. Please consult your appropriate professionals for advice relative to your specific situation. But if you could just go through what should be your overall approach in each of those time periods to saving, spending, debt, and debt management and accumulation, taxes, insurance, and kind of just general concepts of what do you do with that money when you do start to have that surplus and that margin?
Yeah. So I think this is a great way to look at it in these stages. And so if we start with kind of that first stage you were talking about, right, out of school or just coming out, and then kind of that first 5 years, there's some really good basic concepts. Number one is you should have an understanding of what your expenses are versus your income. And so you should have an understanding of that. The word budget sometimes is looked upon as, don't want to talk about a budget, but you need to have an understanding, right? Because you're going to come out of school after all that hard work, and now all of a sudden you've got an income, a new contract, and it feels like you want to spend a lot, but have an understanding of that. And then you really want to start with, if you don't have, you want to have or build an emergency fund. You need to have a fund that is there to access in case something larger happens, your car breaks down, things like that, right?
Would you say about, how many people, I've heard 3 to 6 months of expenses and okay.
Yeah, we usually tell people that 3 to 6 months is good. That tends to be a stretch sometimes. So you could use 10% of income. So you could say 10% of whatever your income is, you could save that. And that's really set aside. It's not put it in and then take it out, and just work on that. Even if you save certain amount per month, that's what you want to budget on. And so if you get that That's a process. Then the second piece of it,
And sorry to interrupt you, Eric. Do you recommend like high yield savings account for that type of thing and just have it where they could just transfer it in immediately, or is it invested very conservatively, or a little both? I mean, what's the...
Yeah, I would say conservatively. So this is not going into the markets. This is not investing in a portfolio because you need to access it. So one of the things you don't want to run into is you have to access money, and then you got to tap an investment that's massively down, or you got to borrow from a retirement account or something else. So you want to have this in a checking savings. You can use high yield savings. At the time of this recording, high yield savings accounts are producing a pretty good interest rate. And so you can set that aside. I call it a little bit further away than just having it in your checking account. Keep it a little bit further away. Even if you set up a separate account to keep it away and have that built up. So I think that's really, really important. The second piece of it is debt. So you can have an understanding of, how much in debt you have. Is there any way of refinancing? Is the debt position the most efficient for you? So in having that within your idea of in the plan on, how are we going to go about paying for it, getting it paid off? Again, do we reposition it? Can we refinance it? Are there other strategies there? So I think having a plan on the debt is also an important part versus just rolling out, starting the career, and you take on what you take on, right? So I think that's really important.
And that's one thing with the debt is that I hear this all the time from residents I teach and coach and young docs. That's really weighing heavily on people. I think it's the recent statistic, at least for the orthodontic arena, it's a little less for the general dentists and physicians are in this, whether they specialize or not, are in the same arena. It's over $500,000 that the average person is coming out with after doing specialty training. And I think for the general dentist, it's 350 to 400. These are big numbers. So they're overwhelmed by that. And I know some people feel like they need to pay that down very aggressively, almost sort of that Dave Ramsey type approach that, you got to just get out of debt and then you invest. At this age group, again, this first sort of 5 years-ish out, what is your advice to them about the debt, even if it's big? I know people it's up to $1 million. So even if it's a big, big number, and again, we can't apply this obviously to every specific situation, but kind of generally speaking, how do you help put their minds at ease to help them manage that debt, not just literally, but kind of conceptually and mentally as well? Hey everybody, I want to take a moment to tell you about this year's Airway Palooza, which is happening October 17th and 18th in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This year's theme is From Downstream to Upstream, the life-saving shift, and will focus on something I'm a big proponent of, which is solving root causes to promote airway health as opposed to simply treating symptoms. That's why I'm honored to be co-chairing this event, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers, including general dentists, orthodontists, pediatric dentists, oral and maxillofacial surgeons, ENTs, board-certified sleep physicians, myofunctional therapists, lactation consultants, and craniofacial specialists, all in one conference setting. There will also be social events both evenings, so you'll have the opportunity to meet and brainstorm with colleagues beachside in Fort Lauderdale. Airway Palooza is the only airway-focused event to be nominated for Best Dental Conference of the Year. Plus, as a special gift for listeners of the Doc Podcast, you can receive a $500 discount off your registration fee by entering the code DOCPalooza at checkout. That's DOCPALOOZA to get $500 off your registration fee. I'll put a code along with a link to the conference registration page in the show notes for today's show. So don't miss out on this opportunity to participate in this amazing collaborative event. Get your tickets to Airway Palooza 2025 now before they sell out. And now, back to today's episode.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that is really two sides, the financially and mentally for sure. And it can be, we see it just definitely be a big burden. I think a couple things there. One is we talked about, understanding your income and expenses and just making sure if you're overstretched, right, on other expenses, it's harder to have a plan to pay that off. One of the things that I think is hard to turn down, especially if you're offered a way to save in retirement plans and other plans, is that time value of money. You can wait to save money for longer term, we're talking about, and really go aggressively at the debt. the issue what you give up is you give up the time value of money. So if you're not putting money in kind of on an ongoing basis. So what we do is say, okay, here's the cash flow. This is what you have in cash flow. Now let's put it in place, knowing that if we go at this and then within this period of time, whatever it is, 10 years, 12 years, okay, we know we're going to get paid off. That's going to get paid off. The good part about it is you've invested into your future with that debt versus buying a car. It doesn't really invest into your future or other debts. So at least it's invested into your future and you invested into yourself. And so part of the relief is, well, let's just take a little bite of the apple and let's look at this and get a plan in place to make sure that, okay, in 12 years, if we pay it off. And a lot of times on these, if you pay a little bit more, if you can afford that in the cash flow, that's going to shorten that time frame as well. And you have to just work it into your cash flow, like you're saying, because they're so large to kind of go at it. What I fearful of is when people go at the debt aggressively, which is great, but again, it could be several years of you giving up time value of money. And on the other end, people are going to be more responsible for themselves than ever. And so, and really the only pension right now that someone has is Social Security. And of course, we don't know where that's going to go in the future. So the time value of money is given up. And we can run a lot of projections that say, if you don't put money in early, right, and you wait 10 years and then you start putting it in and you have someone that put it in for the first 10 years, you're not going to catch them.
Right. Even if your debt is less at that point, you're still, the math doesn't work in your favor, right?
The math does not work in your favor. So it is a balance, and it is not an easy balance. But the other thing is like seeing kind of, okay, if you know you have a plan and versus this is where we're going, that can kind of help, as I see emotionally, that, okay, it feels like it's a long time, but let's get this thing, an understanding of it. And we are making progress. So really important. Yeah. And then as we in the initial stage, if you end up, then you're now into your career, maybe you look at getting married, right? Maybe even kids in that initial stage, maybe not. Then it comes into play on insurance. So insurance, at least covering, if you have something at work, disability insurance, you think about disability, a lot of times through workplace, they have that, certainly health insurance and having the proper health insurance and some life insurance, nothing that's extravagant. One of the things with the docs in the world, they seem to get hit up a lot with insurance strategies and large insurance policies. And what I would say is that you can buy it's really, really cost-effective term insurance that is only just for the just in case something major happens. Because if you are a high-income earner, now that you're getting into your career and you now have a family, and if that income goes away, your family could be in dire need. So you have to make sure that those things are in place, and you can do that pretty cost-effectively. Actually, really cost effectively. So I recommend that as well. And then you get into the challenge, and it's a big challenge when you start saving. Now you have a retirement plan through your workplace. And okay, do I go pre-tax or do I go Roth?
Right. Yeah.
Because pre-tax, I get to save on my tax. Okay. Well, that's good.
For now.
And if you're in a higher bracket, that's like, I get to save on my tax. Roth is, I don't save on it today, so I pay tax on the contribution, but it is tax-free forever. And on the back end, Roth and tax-free wins every time. So that's a challenge. And so how we have to work through that is, personally, I think people should consider all Roth, but sometimes you have to balance it because maybe there's a bracket issue, there's other tax issues, and that doesn't make sense for your situation. But now you have this choice. I mentioned earlier, things have gotten a lot more difficult. This is one of them. And I see a lot of folks on the other end now retired, have this pot of money that's all pre-tax, has yet to be taxed. It's a large amount. And now they're dealing with taking it out and paying tax on it. And I will say to you that when I started many, many years ago, we always told people you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. And that's not always the case. In fact, a lot of times people are still in a pretty high tax bracket.
Because they need enough out of their retirement, you're saying, to
they need enough
fulfill
out of
their lifestyle. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that pre and post, that's a big think through process that will make big differences down the road. And so we found that, especially that they are now, most of these retirement plans, they are offering up this option into retirement pre and post tax, or deductible and non-deductible. So that is also an important piece of it as well. And then you have to balance, once, if you have a family and you want to help out with some education, you have to balance that with your long-term goals. And so balancing that, the trade-off and things of that nature.
So starting like even a 529 at that point.
529s,
when the kids when they're born, basically just start at least chipping into that.
Start chipping into it. There are many states that give you a state tax credit for contributing to a 529 plan that you can utilize. So that helps you a bit from a tax perspective. So you've got kind of that is a chip away as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'm liking this, again, I really appreciate you taking it in this way, because that's great that we can start to conceptualize. And even if you're not in that time frame, you may have a friend or a family member who is, or a business associate who is. And it's human nature that when the time frame we're in, we kind of get a little bit tunnel vision that's the way we need to think. So this is great to be able to paint this picture. So anything else on that? Or
well, I was just, when you were saying that, I was just thinking that often people, I've run across a lot of people over the years, and they said, I don't need an advisor, or come back and see me in 20 years, or I'll come back and see you in 20 years. And that's just not the case, especially if you get into a career and you're in this career, right, in the medical profession, and hopefully you've got a great career with a great income. You need the planning earlier, actually, might be just as critical as it is later. As we walk through these stages, which I do really like how we're talking through these, you'll see how it transitions and what transitions. So
yeah, and that's such a great point, because I will say personally, and I'll happy to add personal anecdotes as we go through this to put some context to it. I mean, we started talking to Justin. We had no money. I mean, it was literally, and we had about $250,000 of combined student loan debt between us. We had no bad debt or credit card debt. We had no assets to our names, my wife and I, in our late 20s. I'm about 30 actually at that point. And we could have easily said, well, we don't make anything. Why are we going to pursue financial advice? Or why are we going to pursue an advisory team? But the conversations we had with Justin and his team, and starting to build that plan, literally, like, this is, what is your vision? What's your short-term, long-term goals? What do you want to achieve? And then little by little, because then all of a sudden you have a child. And if you have the plan for these things, and you literally just reach out to that person and say, okay, here's where we're at now. How do we modify this and change this? Well, is it important to you to pay for their education? Yes. Let's start a 529 plan for them then. Here's the states you can do it. And we ended up doing New York and Utah. Just this is the way we did it. We got a nice state tax advantage for doing it in New York. So it was just, that was there. Whereas if you wait, I feel like it's one of those things it's easy to just put off and say, well, I don't have any money, or almost like I'll start losing weight tomorrow, right? It's just easy to kind of right? Just be like, I'll get to it. But
yeah, it really is. It really is. And it's also helpful, I believe, to have the relationship like you did, and you establish it early, because when my doctors, I'm not switching my doctors typically unless they retire. Right. Mm-hmm. So once I establish and I'm happy with them, they're kind of guiding me through my life. So my general practitioner has been my general practitioner forever, was all our kids' general practitioner, and he's guiding me now. Now, if I need to go to a specialist, he kind of guides me off to that as I get older, but establishing that early on. And what I would say in this stage, your decision should be strategy first and plan first, and then determine the best solution. It shouldn't be product driven. But unfortunately, this area is oversold too early. And how do they know you need a big fat insurance policy if they haven't done a plan. That's like building a house without a blueprint. So I just think, as you said, establishing it early will help you make some good decisions along the way, which is going to pay off hugely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So for the second group, that sort of 5-ish years to 20 years, again, doesn't have to be exact parameters, but generally speaking, that's sort of mid-career, that sweet spot. You're ramping up your numbers and your production and your income. You're starting to have more margin. Hopefully you can talk to this as well, but hopefully not spending all your margin. But we're hopefully starting to see more margin. Your family's getting more established. What is your advice in those same parameters to this group?
Yeah. So now I start thinking about, okay, hopefully now you've done the first stage, right? And you've got that kind of rolling. Okay. Now you're starting to grow your wealth. Now you need to start managing your taxes. And I don't mean getting your tax return done. I mean actual planning. I was talking to a client, someone yesterday that's a physician. And he's like, I'm just getting crushed in taxes. And he's in this stage. So you got to manage your taxes, and then you got to protect what you're building, right? So then what you're looking at is maximizing the plans that you have. So whether that's 401k, 403bs, right? Retirement plans, right? HSA accounts, right? You could look at what we call backdoor Roth strategies, other strategies for the higher income folks. If you still,
and would that be because they're over the income limits for Roths, but they can, in the future years, take out the income and contribute it? Some is tax free, right? But then beyond a certain level, it's taxed.
It's a way. Yeah, exactly. It's a way to fund that tax free pot at a faster pace. When you're blown out with limits. So backdoor Roth strategies. You're now, and hopefully you've got you're in some investments. And so your investments are growing. And so diversification is way different as you get more and more assets. And then hopefully you've got this strategic plan on the debt payoff. And is there other refinancing, right? I mean, there could be other opportunities. Interest rates, you think about that and what they've changed. I mean, our interest rates go down in the future. There could be some other refinancing opportunities. So I think about that. And then the tax piece of it, tax planning, we talked about at least an annual. And again, I'm not talking about putting numbers in the box. I'm talking about literally having a discussion around planning. And you also then need to think about the risks. So we talked about life insurance, disability, and so forth. Now you need to make sure liability coverages, umbrella insurance, things like that, asset protection. Do you have that? Also estate planning. Not that estate planning is not important from day one, but just making sure will, durable power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, making sure those documents are in place. And they can be simplified documents at the time, probably not overly complex. But again, you're planning for if something happens. And then really allowing to continue to kind of make sure that you're putting in right place, right time. And your assets now really should be taking hold. And if they're placed right, you really should start to see some of your wealth start to grow at this stage.
Okay, awesome. And then on the note of the taxes, just to reinforce that and kind of underscore that, when I did a 5-part series with my accountant, John Vento, and they have a wealth management part to their firm as well. And so he's well-versed in this. And he was saying from the CPA side and from the wealth management side, and this has always been the case, I've been their client for over a decade, and we meet in the fall. I mean, the tax planning, if you're within a CPA who you're meeting come tax time,
it's gone.
Yeah, you are doing what you're saying before, just checking boxes and filling out forms. Like, to tax plan, you have got to be doing it in the end of the third quarter, beginning of fourth quarter, even of the year preceding the filing of that return, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. When we get into the third quarter, fourth quarter, that's planning. If you're doing it after the fact, I mean, that's water under the bridge.
Yeah. So
not much you can do there. And so in this stage, probably it's that third, fourth quarter. As we move to other state, as we get later, and again, more complexity potentially comes into play, it's probably more often. It's probably a couple times a year, especially depending on your situation. If you've got other sources of income and you're doing some other work and there's other things that are coming, and you may need to do it more than once a year, but that's an absolute. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that, just so people understand, like, well, what would I be talking about? I mean, think about it. If you want to buy a new X-ray machine, or you want to potentially invest something big in your business, if you don't really understand the tax implications of that, maybe now is not the year. Maybe it's next year. Maybe you've got a lot on the books for next year. Maybe you missed work this year for certain reasons or family reasons, and the revenues are down a little bit. All of that planning, I mean, I've heard it once described as phantom income. I mean, you're literally creating money when you plan appropriately from a tax standpoint, because it's money that you would just be paying out to the government that you get to save legally. Again, we're not talking tax evasion. Obviously, we're talking tax avoidance, which is completely legal. It's strategies out there to do it. I always say the politicians passed the laws to be able to do this.
Absolutely.
They wrote the laws that way for a reason. So we can take advantage of those. And that's the sort of planning you're doing. But what I want to, again, make sure I'm emphasizing is you have to be keeping your books accurately. You have to have, whether you use a bookkeeper or your CPA firm, but you have to have accurate data. If you just give your CPA or your financial advisor random numbers, or I think I did this, or yeah, I think we're up, a couple 100,000 this year, they can't make accurate plans. I mean, literally, we go through to this day still, we go through such a thorough process of going through, and I own multiple different companies, but through every different company and what the implications were, what that company's done in that year, and then through to the composite of what it looks like we would owe on our personal return come tax time, and or any corporate expenses we would have as well. So that helps me prepare and me budget. So it's not a surprise of a big tax bill. And if it's going to be a bigger tax bill, well, then maybe this is a year I want to buy some new equipment, or I want to do something, or travel to a CE course, right? So it really does matter, but you have to do your homework day in and day out, month in and month out, to keep accurate documentation and books. Or else you can't expect your advisory team to be able to be like going to a doctor, to use your analogy before, going to the physician and telling them the completely different story about your health than what you're actually feeling. Totally different symptoms. Totally. How are they going to figure out and get to the bottom of it if you don't give them accurate information?
Correct. Yeah. It's very, very important.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else on that second?
No, and I think other things is structure. If you have other opportunities to buy into a center, surgeries, you'd say,
okay, great point.
Part of an LLC, how's that all look? So we see kind of these.
Maybe buy your building if you have an opportunity, right? If you're
buying your building. The other thing is that oftentimes business owners, they wrap themselves up in kind of the value of the business, and they're not thinking about setting themselves up in a plan and saving outside of it. So that's not really diversification. If you do have a practice and you've got good cash flow, there's retirement plans that you can structure and set up where you can put in a lot more, and your employees have to contribute, but you can look at kind of maxing more into that plan, which will benefit you down the road. People don't think about if you're providing matches and so forth, and you put in a lot more and you're matching it, you're actually pulling money out of your company in a tax efficient manner. So all those things, kind of how they work together at that stage, I think is really important.
Okay. And keep the emergency fund right about, you got to adjust it. I mean, it's not going to be the same dollars it was the first 5 years. You're going to have to add to that, correct? To be able to, because obviously your expenses are probably going to be higher in this time period. So you've got to add to that emergency fund to cover that 3 to 6 months still.
Exactly. And now at this stage, you may start the emergency fund being larger. And we talked a little bit about positioning of it. Now you could position it in something that's you may need to, instead of having taxable high yield savings account, maybe you're now benefiting from tax free. Maybe you're benefiting even from some short term kind of tax free bonds as another. We call them kind of layers, and so those are things that you can get more on your kind of your overall cash reserve, more earnings. So that's just not sitting there not earning anything.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And do you recommend at this point, I had a guest on the show a little while back, and he was referencing having sort of actually he's an orthodontist, Mark McClellan, great guy who's also a financial advisor. And he was recommending, I think it was like an investment fund. I forget the exact name. I don't believe that's it. But the concept was it was essentially not his emergency fund, also not his investments, but almost like a slush fund of reserves that you take out that you're going to do some other alternative investing, like you were talking about, buying your building or investing in a surgery center. Or do you recommend that they then pull from some of their paper assets or maybe post-tax investments to pay for those types of opportunities, or a combination thereof? Do you recommend that sort of mid fund?
Yeah, no. So that might be something that's not, let's call it, wrapped up in kind of long-term retirement assets that you can't get to them and has penalties, taxes. There's a lot of mess to kind of get to that. Yep. Maybe that's in something that's it's more accessible. You can get to it. Yeah, maybe you sell something at a capital gain, but it's much more accessible in that side of it to use in things like you're saying, alternatives, buildings, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And that's, again, I keep saying, and I know you do too, but the plan, like, is it part of your vision to own real estate? Is it part of your vision to, and if it's real estate, do you want to be a landlord? Do you want to own a bunch of duplexes or small apartment buildings? Or do you just want to be a co-owner in an LLC that owns a surgery center where you have limited liability, obviously through the LLC, but also limited responsibility? Or do you want completely passive investments where you invest as part of a team in a property in another state and you just are able to receive the rent? So that's what I want people to start to think about in this time period, if you would agree with that, is there's some more you can do with your money than just, because there are tax advantages on those vehicles as well. And when they refinance debt, the depreciation that you get, so you can literally have a loss on the K1 for that other company based on the tax advantages of real estate that are there and legal, and that loss can flow through. So there's a lot of different things you can do at that point. And I'm not the expert on it. I've done a lot of them, so I'm familiar with them, but these are the questions you have to be asking your advisory team. But if you don't have cash flow, and if you spend everything you make, none of this applies. And you miss everything.
Right. Yeah. None of it applies at all. And with a plan too, you can talk through, okay, you get to the point, right? And you want to slow down part-time, or you want to retire, what position you're in. And if you have real estate, do you want to continue to be managing it? Right. What's kind of the out? So just thinking through that and understanding it is really important. I do agree though with the fund, going back to, you need to have access to some other assets that are a bit more accessible than the retirement plans and other things, or just going out and trying to take a whole bunch of a liability, right? A big loan out. You still may have to take a loan on it, but hopefully you've got some assets you can put towards down payment of whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah. And that starts that first 5 years when you're disciplined about your spending. And it's amazing when you are, and that revenue ramps up and you have that delayed. Robert Kiyosaki talks about the delayed gratification. When you do that, and you have those resources. I had a colleague, Daniel Camacho, on the show recently. He's an orthodontist, and he's followed this philosophy as well. And he was talking about ended up buying into an apartment building in Indianapolis, and he said he's just getting rent checks. And we talked about it, and I said, but yeah, if you weren't fiscally responsible, he started his own, or he bought into a practice and has been rebuilding it. I said, but if you weren't saving and creating a margin for your savings, you wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that. People don't think about the lost opportunity that is there because they don't ever see it or don't ever have the opportunity. So they just think, well, I don't have access to those type of resources. Well, if you're spending everything you make, you're right. You're not going to have access to those other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we go on to that, one last point on those. What do you tell people who are not good at generating cash flow, whether it be in their business or they are very profitable in their business, but they have a spending problem?
Yeah, I mean, that sometimes is hard, because if it's an issue that they somewhere deep down, they just absolutely have spending problem, then you really need to work on budgeting, right? Mm-hmm. Budgeting personally, but then also budgeting from a perspective of the business. So on the business side, what I look at is who's helping you with the books and the accounting side, and the kind of who's helping you be accountable there. And sometimes there just needs to be a reality gut check that says, if you're not good with that, you need to get somebody that is. Right. So I've had certain instances where then the business owner just gets an allotment. So they set up a budget, and the business owner just absolutely can't go out, right, and buy the new shiny new object. And they set up this budget kind of where it's at and how it is. It's the way it's stated. So that's one thing. And same thing personally. So personally, if they're spenders, setting up a budget.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Thank you. So on to that third group. Now we're, at least probably for most people, halfway through their career, at least 20 years in, up to that point where you're looking to retire. We won't set an age on that, but what are the main things and the different criteria for this age group?
Yeah. So now we see the complexity, probably the trajectory more complex. Okay. So hopefully you've done a good job. You got the foundation, it's growing. What you're doing is growing. Maybe you got the opportunity to buy into a practice or to another building, things of that nature. So now you've got more complexity in your situation. So are you going to have enough cash? So we're still planning, and what's that number? Okay. Mm-hmm. At that time, I like to talk about 15 years from retirement and less, 10 years. Okay, we're going to work towards this number so that at some point you could say, look, I have walk away money. I have walk away opportunity. You may still want to continue what you're doing, or maybe you want to scale it back, but you know what? You have that opportunity. What's that? What is that? And that is a number. It literally is a number, and how your liability, and cash flow. Those couple things, and we can get you to, at that point in time, you now have the flexibility to say, I'm done is done. So we start working through that more concrete. Yep. The other piece of it then is mitigation from a tax perspective. Probably one of the biggest expenses you'll have, certainly in retirement, but oftentimes from this stage on will be taxes. And so mitigation is not deferral. It's actually mitigating tax. We have 20 plus strategies that we use depending on the situation to mitigate. You paid this amount of tax. With mitigation, you're paying this much. So mitigation then is not a 1-year event. It's an ongoing event.
And what does that look like, if you don't mind, just not specifics, but just kind of like for people who don't understand that.
So mitigation can be things in investments that do offset of income. So you just don't invest, but you get offset of income. You can do tax credit programs. You can do strategies that are there. They exist. And the ultra wealthy utilize these strategies. They have the ultra wealthy. We often hear someone's in the 12% tax bracket, right? And they're worth $2 billion or $3 billion or whatever. How are they doing that? Well, they have really, really smart people on their team working for them. And those people know the code. And they take that code and they use it to their advantage. So it's there, right? And we're not doing anything that's, as you said earlier, illegal. We're utilizing code. So anyway, mitigation's an important piece. Other pieces that are not financial but important is a checkup on the estate plan. A lot of times those just get pushed under the rug. It's not fun to talk about. Now your situation's getting more complex. Maybe you've got property in 2 states. Maybe you want to leave money to someone else. Maybe there's second marriages involved and other things. So estate planning and execution of that, is really, really important. So I think those pieces along the way at that stage are some important concepts. Our planning then obviously changes. Maybe at that stage, at 20 year in, you might have some kids starting anyway, right? Getting in college and kind of getting ready to move along. So what's that look like? Right. Because by the time they're in school, if you haven't planned for it and you want to help out, you're either cash flowing it, right? Or you got some saved, or maybe both, or it's on their responsibility. So figuring out kind of, where are they going to land? And now you have some more foundational understanding of where they're at.
Do you have any other suggestions on that point for how much debt how I think I got to word this so it makes sense, but my thought process being, and maybe in that you'll understand the question, is a lot of times in school, kids will want to go to a private school, and some of these private schools are $90,000 a year now, and parents will make all sorts of sacrifices. The kids will take on a significant amount of debt as well. Parents will spend everything they're bringing in, not take the time to utilize continuing to invest and build their own portfolio. Maybe they have to continue to do that because they haven't been as fiscally disciplined all along, or saved as much, or had some bad luck, or things happen. I know it's very specific to each individual person. That being said, there are a lot of good schools that are state schools as well in most states, and there are a lot of schools that don't cost that. So at what point are you advising clients to have that conversation with their children for the expectation of, we will pay this amount or we can do this amount? Beyond that, we aren't going to contribute? Or do they start just saying, you can go wherever you want to go, even if it's $90,000 a year, and we will do whatever we have to do? Again, I know it's not a fair question in the sense of it's very specific to different families, but are there any general guidelines you would give that you advise people on to kind of help them navigate through that? Because I know in the age I'm at now, with one daughter in college and another daughter getting there, that in talking to families with kids of comparable ages, that's a big discussion going on now. And a lot of parents are very stressed by that decision.
Yeah, no, we do see a lot of parents now, and we encourage them in the planning to kind of set an amount. Okay. To think about it from a standpoint of, you're going to give X amount, $25,000 a year, or 20, or $50,000 for the whole 4 years. Okay. To set an amount. Certainly the best way to pay for college is other people's money. Yep. So scholarships, things like that, apply for, go aggressively at that. I think the discussion point comes into where they're starting to think about post-secondary, kind of where's their education going, about beyond high school. And probably in the middle school now, even they're starting to prep that. And then as they get into high school, having that conversation. You certainly want to have that plan prior. But I think it is realistic for folks to say there's a cap on this. So if you decide to go to the state school, right, there'll be less to worry about. You decide to go to the private school, it'll going to be more to worry about. And put a cap on it. And do you want to sacrifice? So one of the things in the planning is we can look at, well, if you want to pay full boat, this is what it's going to mean to you. That's what it's going to mean to you. The other piece of it is with the generations and the baby boomer generation, we're seeing wealth now starting to get passed down. We're seeing grandparents starting to help out with grandkids. They really love helping their grandkids. They loved helping the kids, but they love helping their grandkids more. Yep. And so we see that. And so that's kind of a hard conversation. If the grandparents kind of have that, they can afford to help out some, but a discussion with the grandparents, with your parents, right? This is what our kids want to do. That might open up have that discussion. But it's been really helpful with the plan. If we say, well, you want to pay full boat, let's take a look what that's going to do for your retirement. Yes. Right? Yeah. Let's see if we can balance both. Yep. And many of them want to balance both. Yep. Sometimes exactly what you're saying. They're all out. They're going to support their kids. And we support it if they want to do that. But we also say you need to understand what else does that affect? Yep. Yep. And for the 529s, and again, correct me if I misstate any of this, but when you have surpluses, people get worried about that, but you can pass that on to other family members. They could pass it on to their children one day if ultimately that's what you want to do. So in other ways, you said to help out as a grandparent is if you saved it for your children and they don't use it all, they also may go to professional school and you might not have anticipated that. So you might have the ability to now help pay for some of their professional school, not just their 4 years of undergrad. And there are
vehicles now where they're allowing, and I would guess, obviously I don't know this, but I would guess it's only going to get more so, where you can start to convert some of that into retirement savings. They can do conversions. I think it's into a Roth up to 30,000 maybe. You have to make at least 6,000 a year to put that in. I don't know if that's the exact numbers, but the concept is when they get to be working age, if you've oversaved for the 529, they're starting to have ways to start to convert some of that into non-education retirement income as well.
They do. And when you get scholarships, you can actually, if they get scholarships, you can take out of the 529 plan equal to the scholarship and you're not penalized.
Oh, so I didn't know that. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, so they allow you to kind of take that out, right?
Okay.
And if they're off campus and they're paying for an apartment, well, you can draw out what's a fair amount that they would pay on campus. Yep. Right. Yep. And food, if they needed a computer, if they needed, right. So there are a lot of ways, and I quite frankly don't see a lot, plus the cost, quite frankly, I don't see a lot of left in there.
Right.
Because of it, it gets used up.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And we do have a fair amount kind of going off to more than a 4-year program. So they're going to use that up. So there are some ways you can look at to try to get that down to zero. And if not, like you said, you can pass it on. And there's some other strategies you can utilize. So to actually end up paying a penalty on the 529 plan, I think it would be probably very rare that would happen ultimately this situation.
Yeah. So pretty much no reason not to contribute as much as you're able to from an early age of your child's. And we started when the kids were born, literally.
And if nothing on the 529 plan, just another mark on that is at least contribute if you're getting something credit from your state.
Right.
At least at least get that.
Yep. Yeah, because it was just what my understanding of it was if I think it was 5,000 per child, we were able to do at that time. I don't know if they've changed the numbers since. And in New York, that added up to a $10,000 deduction off of our state tax.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Is that how it works in most states? So,
a lot of times what happens is you get a credit. So you do up to 5,000 or 7,500 and they'll give you 20% credit. 20% of what you contribute. States are different, so check where your state is and how that works. But that is free money. Yeah,
literally. Yeah. So cool. Okay, great. Anything else in this third group?
No, hopefully you're getting ready to move into the retirement years.
Yeah. So now you're maybe an empty nester, assuming you retired about the time your kids are at that age, and you've worked hard, you've put a plan in place, you have assets, college is being hopefully paid for if you've made good decisions and you're not having to, I know there are people who can continue to have to work. And actually on that, maybe as part of this last group, sort of the retirement group, maybe you start this group before we go into the different areas we've been hitting on with each group prior. What are some of the things you've seen especially in professionals, but really in anybody in retirement? Because everybody's working hard to get there, but it seems like they don't really have a plan for retirement. It seems like it's like this thing, like you want to get to the point where you can retire and not have the stress and burden of what you've been doing. That being said, most people, especially in the professions, we're doers, we're active. We've had a lot of socialization, right? We're around a lot of people, a lot of time. Sometimes it seems like too much so. And all of a sudden, that's cut off, right? That there's an end to that. And so if you would, before we get into the details of it, just talk conceptually for a minute about the retirement years, if you would, and what you've seen in your experiences.
Yeah. I mean, it goes financial, and then what are you going to do with yourself? Mm-hmm. So from that perspective is, we call it the mountain. So I just wrote a book about this. We'll have an offer at the end of to be able for someone to pick up a copy of it. But the financial mountain. So when you're climbing your mountain, saving, investing, these stages we've talked about as you're climbing the mountain and you get to the peak before you come down, and then you start the descent. And the descent is retirement, right before retirement, and then in retirement. And I share with people that mountain climbing, most of the fatalities happen on the way down. They don't happen on the way up. So when you get into retirement, there's typically a lot of decisions, especially if you now had a good career, you've done what we've talked about in the other stages. Now you have assets. And so you could have literally 5 or 6 different streams of income They're taxed differently. How do you choose when? What do you choose? So that's the financial side. The emotional side, what are you going to do? So we often see people somewhat easing into it, right? They teach, they do other things, right? Or they consult with virtual now. There's a lot of folks that I know that do virtual to consulting with companies. What are you going to do? Some people have an absolute plan, but yeah, you kind of fall off, right, from doing all that to not much to do. And we have clients that don't retire because they have that fear. It's like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to do anything. So I think it's the emotional side of it. And again, we talked about this much earlier, asking the right questions and thinking about it. What am I going to do emotionally? And then the other part of it is financially, right? Yep. How am I going to go and achieve that? And at that time, hopefully you've done a good job. It's not about, okay, do I have enough? So I mentioned the number. So at one point, the number's good, right? If I'm able to have a number that I'm going to be able to retire in the lifestyle that we need to retire. So it's not about having enough. It's what you do with what you have. And so we see people on, okay, what do I do with what I have? And am I making the right decisions? And things change. The tax laws on this recording, we just have a brand new, big, beautiful tax bill. And just in our planning now, as we're doing for 2025, I mean, they've added some additional deductions if you're over a certain age. And so it actually it seems to be swinging some tax opportunities or more in your pocket for some retirees. So right there, that changed. So what are you going to do for that? And so I think it's just knowing that. And oftentimes how you got there and how you're going to live the rest of your life, they are much different segments in life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then do you recommend insurance at this point? Do you phase out of life insurance? I know there's some insurance investment type vehicles they have. And if you have some debt left and you have the assets to cover it, are you just going to get rid of that? So just in case you pass, someone has to deal with it. Kind of what are those things you've been working on all along? People here a lot of times talk about self-insured. I mean, at what point would you say that you kind of have them take those steps?
Yeah. So the insurance part, let's talk about that first. So in certain aspects, insurance called permanent insurance has a cash value component to it with a death benefit. So if you did those earlier on in your career, and I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying they need to be right for you. If you use that strategy, then you need to make sure they're funded properly, because at this point in the stage, as you're getting into retirement, hopefully most of those are paid and their cash value is supporting whatever the policy is in death benefit.
Yep.
So hopefully those are paid, or I don't like using the word paid up, but there's enough there that you're not paying premiums. They're all being paid out of the cash value.
Okay. Yep.
So we try to tie those up into a retirement age.
Okay.
Do they need insurance? Well, probably not for survivor income. If you got enough assets, right, survivor income, probably don't need it for that. Although there's been no one as a beneficiary that's turned down an insurance check.
Right.
But and also for estate planning, if you're in the healthcare field, that right, people are living longer, right, and you get into some extended care later on in life, to help ensure that cost has gotten just really, really high. Those policies are much more today. And I'm not saying they wouldn't make sense for somebody, but that's where you have to look at self-insure. So I bring that back to self-insure. You have to look at that. So that's really important. And then
you're talking like long-term care policies.
Yeah, long-term care to self-insure. If you have enough assets, can you kind of, if something happens, can you afford it out of your cash flow? And that's what I would call self-insure. So you think about those things, and those are often bought even during your working career. Absolutely fine. But again, I can't stress enough if they're life insurance to make sure they're funded properly. And that happens again when you take out the policy. Other things that you think about in this stage of life, you talk about debt. Ideally, that at least non-business debt. So someone may have debt that bought into some business, property, still could have debt on it. It's cash flowing okay. The assets supporting the debt, that could be okay. Mm-hmm. But debt as far as home, second homes, things like that, you're certainly in a better position, right? As you get to retirement, is to have not that over your head. Mm-hmm. So that okay, no matter what, right? We don't at least have to worry about covering the mortgage.
Yep. And emergency fund, I mean, is it not a point at this point to have that much cash on hand?
Right. Yeah. It's not as important. And in fact, it's still, you could have assets that still are accessible.
Sure.
And you could say, I could get at them. You're not calling it an emergency fund, but now it's further away than, and have an opportunity to grow. In this environment right now with rates and the way they are much better. So that's a good positive thing. So they're not sitting in an account that's not earning anything. Mm-hmm. And then all of that overarching, we talked about mitigation, that doesn't stop. So the mitigation side can lead you into retirement. If you have good income, assets, growth from other investment accounts, eventually have to take out of retirement accounts. How does that all look?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. That was really great the way you put that all together and created that plan. I love doing that. When we talked ahead and we were kicking around ideas and came up with this thought to create it into quadrants like that. I think I really love the ability to just highlight each point. And the neat part too is you see the interconnectivity between each point, which you referenced a couple times. It's like it's building this house. It's creating this foundation. You're laying it when they're in your early years. Then you're really in your producing years, really, really trying to build a strong house. And then it's like in that last stage, you're kind of putting the finishing touches on. And then you're in retirement kind of living in it, right? Enjoying it, living it. You want to make sure that you're able to enjoy those fruits of your labor, and then hopefully you have something to leave or pass on if that's something that's part of your vision as well. And it all comes back to, in my mind, and I want to hear your thoughts on the last word on it. It all comes back in my mind to starting with a plan early and being fiscally disciplined and creating margins to be able to save your money and not spend it all. I think without those things, I just don't know how you do it.
Right, exactly. I love this thought that wealth isn't just about income. It's about intentional planning and flexibility. And so I just love people thinking about that. Your income could be great, fortunate to have it, but also that intentional planning, flexibility along the way, that's really building your overall financial life and wealth.
Yeah, let you leave it with that. That's great advice. And thank you so much for taking the time to explain all of that in such detail. How can people get in touch with you? I know you referenced your book as well. Put a link to the show in the show notes. But yeah, if people want to reach out to you and contact you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I wrote an Amazon bestseller book. It's called The Personal CFO Revolution, a guide along your financial journey. It talks about the financial mountain. They can go to hilltopwealthtax.com/podcast. So that's hilltopwealthtax.com/podcast. On there, you can get I'd love to give you a copy. You can get a free copy. Also on there, how we work. If someone wants to talk more, they can set up a 15-minute introductory call with one of our team members. There is absolutely no obligation. We find out more about somebody, and then you find out more about us. And then we determine if it makes sense to have a conversation with a wealth advisor or not. And it's worth at least a call. So we'd be glad to talk to anybody that does have questions or wants to put a plan in place or just wants to get a second opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you will reevaluate if someone's going through something and maybe they're having second thoughts, or maybe it was someone they were using from a family member, a family friend, or maybe that their firm, the person who's passed on or retired. You will reevaluate those as well. It doesn't have to be just someone early in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll reevaluate it. Coming from the medical profession, we say that it's hard to get a second opinion from the advisor that gave you the first one.
So, very true.
So just a second opinion directionally, making sure that you're on track. And we'll tell people if they're on track, that's great. If there's some things we can adjust along your financial journey and help you with that, that's also good as well.
Erik Brenner, been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for taking your time and for explaining things so clearly. You did a great job. These are complicated concepts, and I love how you distilled it down, really put it into simple terms. And for everyone out there, again, this should give you the tools to at least get thinking about this and start asking the questions. Assemble a team. Reach out to Erik or someone like Erik in that position to start to build that team. Don't wait. If you don't have a team, you need to start to build one now. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. Also, if you know of someone who would make a great guest for this show, or if you'd like to be a guest yourself, please email me at drmike@theorthocoach.com. And be sure to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content. Thanks so much for listening, and always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.